Hello, Dr. Kendi. Shari and my team are screening folks to make sure it's just students coming in. So we'll be starting at 4:30. Nice to see you.
Oh, sounds good. Nice to see you.
Great. It's nice to see the sun today.
Definitely, finally.
I'm just going to do a quick hello and to announce you because I don't want to take, I want to leave all the time to you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Catherine Kennedy, the director of the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our first in a monthly series of Candid Conversations with Dr. Kendi. Thank you for coming, Dr. Kendi.
Thank you for having me. And just
I don't know. I can't hear you, but I know you're not muted. I just can't hear you.
what about now? That's better. Sorry. Um, so I was asked to talk for a few minutes about the Haitian Revolution, and then I just want to open it up for questions to talk about that revolution or to talk about anything. I I'm oftentimes asked by many people about what sort of gives me hope, and I oftentimes mention that it's important to not receive hope from what's happening in society, because what happens is, you'll have people they'll be hopeful because they have a black president, and then suddenly you get a white nationalist president and you're hopeless, right? And then you're paralyzed, and then you're not fighting for it as as hard. um, and so I try not to receive hope from events, from what's happening in society. I try to recognize that in order to bring about change, we have to believe change is possible, and so my hope is more philosophical. But if I was going to gather hope from what's happening, in society, then one of the things that would give me hope would be the Haitian Revolution, which, came during a period of revolutionary activity all over the Western world. And of course, many people are familiar with the American Revolution and the French Revolution that happened around the same time, but they're not as familiar with the fact that in 1791, Haiti was the most prized and profitable colony, European colony in the entire world. And the return on the investment from Haiti, and I should say an investment, of course, that was a slaveholding investment, was greater than in any other colony in Asia, in Africa, certainly in the Americas. And, and so a group of enslaved people led by someone named Boukman rose up in 1791 for their freedom. And of course, the French, who were colonizing Haiti, did not want to lose the jewel of the French Empire. So Napoleon at the time sent an army of nearly 100,000 men that was led by his brother, if I remember correctly, to take back the island. Because by that point, these people had not only risen up, they had basically gained control, of the island. And this group of enslaved people, with no military training, were able to defeat local slaveholding forces to gain control of the island, led by an incredible tactician named Toussaint Louverture. And were not only able to gain control of the island, but then when that army was sent, they defeated that army with no military training. But then not only that, in order to maintain or gain their independence, they also had to defeat armies from Spain and England in succession. So what I'm talking about here is by 1804, these enslaved people in Haiti were able to declare Haitian independence, were able to declare a new free Black republic, the first in the Western Hemisphere, after defeating a local slaveholding army, as well as armies from France, England, and Spain in succession with no military training. And so if that doesn't give you hope about the possibilities of change, about what could happen when a group of people are committed to, as Americans would call it, liberty or death, then to me, nothing will. And so I'm always, am fascinated by the Haitian Revolution, because I think what happened there is one of the most incredible things that have happened in human history, and certainly in modern history. And to me, the fact that the American Revolution and the French Revolution are told as these sort of beacons of freedom and not the Haitian Revolution, shows us all we need to know. Well, and partly because people like Thomas Jefferson were opposed to those revolutionaries in Haiti who were calling for the same freedom that he called for in his own country. So I'll stop there. And so I just wanted to sort of open up mentioning the Haitian Revolution. And so, I understand I can take questions. And so if anybody wants to say, hey, I want to have a question in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, then I can go to you and we can start a conversation. Yes.
Hi, my name is Renuma. And so we've met a couple of times, but not formally. And so like we did one of our maps meetings together. But I remember the first time I heard you talk was with HTC at another event, and it was with voting. And I mean, I don't remember what the actual thing was. But my question was, after seeing Dinomo with his mask saying vote, and I was like, well, why stuff it down our throats if like we know that the system doesn't work? And I remember you saying that, well, it does work. It just doesn't. We have to see who it works for. But if we're talking about the Haitian Revolution now, and we're seeing like this example of that gives us hope of like people revolting and like unity and power in people and doing that, then does it make sense to continue to play into the system that wasn't set up for you, that wasn't like made up for you? Like it's I'm taking Professor Grundy's course right now on race ethnicity, and it's a very like American thing. Like slavery is as American as apple pie, and all these like after effects of it as well. So does it make sense to like follow the system's rules in order to like and hope that that's what's gonna give us, or what's gonna like liberate Black people, or like any like like if we're saying that like because
so I think it's important for us to. I'm happy you mentioned system, but you also mentioned rules. And so when you think about a system, one way to understand it is as a collection of rules. And so, obviously, if you have a racist system is made up of racist rules.
mm-hmm.
So can you ever follow racist rules to create an anti-racist society? Of course not. But what happens is if you transform the rules, you're going to transform the system. And so I don't want us to think that that is not possible, because that's precisely what those Haitian revolutionaries did. The rules in Haiti were that if you're Black, you're enslaved. And if you're enslaved, you're exploited. And if you're exploited, you're consistently and regularly, violently sort of violated. And they completely transformed those rules, and thereby created a free, a system that was based on freedom. Any other questions? Vela?
Hi, Dr. Kendi. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
I was really fascinated by the story you just told, but I wonder like how and why people can succeed considering there's such a huge gap between like the equipments the military people have versus the Black people in Haiti has. So why and how they succeed?
Well, I think first and foremost, there was a military there was a training difference, certainly in terms of military training, but the passion and the fight and the drive that these people had. I mean, literally, they knew that if they lost this battle, they were going to be enslaved. Like, so there's nothing, I mean, what are the, but I think what's also important is typically slave revolts were put down because of inequality in military resources. So, and so because they were able to take over the island was an armed camp, right? So there were already a tremendous amount of military resources that allowed for a small group of whites to basically control this large Black population. So when they took over the land, they took over the garrison, right? And so then, of course, they had the weaponry to fight when those armies came.
That's great. So like just a quick follow-up question. So how do you think people in our current society, current situation, can apply the spirit or what we have learned from the Black people in Haiti in that story in our current society?
I think one thing that those, if we can sort of expand them out to abolitionists. Now, obviously, they used a certain form of resistance in order to win their freedom, but fundamentally they were abolitionists. And what abolitionists did from Haiti to Boston was that, you know what, they called for immediate emancipation. So we're not, and that was against those who were saying, oh no, that's too costly, or that's too impractical, or that's too hard. They were like, no, slavery should not live another day. It should end right now. Just as right now, you have people saying climate change is an existential crisis to humankind. So we need a massive Green New Deal. Just like you have people saying right now, you know what? There's this massive growing racial wealth gap. So we need a massive reparations plan to eliminate that racial wealth gap. And so what's happening is you assess, are these policies being put forth, are they going to eliminate the problem or put a Band-Aid on it or gradually reduce inequity? And obviously what those Haitian revolutionaries were calling was the complete eradication of slavery itself. And that's what they achieved.
I don't know if can have another quick comment.
Actually, wait, let's go to somewhere else. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, anyone? Arona?
Hi. First of all, can you hear me? Because I've been having
Yes.
connection problems. Okay. I was let into the meeting late, and it was just when you were ending whatever you had to say. So would you mind just summarizing it really quick?
I just spoke about the Haitian Revolution.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Is there anything specific?
Well, I don't want to like rehash it for everyone, but maybe there's a book called The Black Jacobins that you could read up on, what happened with the Haitian Revolution.
All right, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Eli? Oh,
Oh, sorry. I'm using my phone. I apologize, but Dr. Kendi, nice to meet you. Coming from a Haitian descent, I am very happy to see someone that can really highlight the history of the Haitian Revolutionary. Being a Haitian American, it's not something that you learn here in America. So it's like you lose the history from the beginning because it's not in the history books. The history books kind of start off with the whole Columbus and how he found America. And I guess that is the history that is kind of like taught here in America. So it's really great to hear that you can use this platform and your voice to kind of just talk about the history of the Haitian Revolutionary, and considering the state that Haiti is in now, how there's a lot of political things that are going on, and people, like whenever you Google Haiti, it's always being considered as like the poorest third world country. Our history, where we came from, what we fought for, it's never really the narrative that is being spoken about. So I do really appreciate you sharing this story, and for people who haven't heard it before, that they can kind of learn it, and then also further research to see like how far the Haitian people have come and why they're where they're at now, not just the narrative of like we're the poorest country out here, but there is a reason, and that debt that was not paid to Haiti, and sort of in a way just kind of, although we've overcame, but kind of kept us where we're at. So thank you very much for touching on that.
Oh, no problem. And I think I didn't tell the story of what happened after independence, but I think it's important for everybody to know that by 1804, Toussaint Louverture, who led the Haitian Revolution, had been captured. And Dessalines, who was one of his lieutenants, was leading the way, but ultimately another leader named Christophe was ultimately one of the first sort of leaders of that country, who was quite partial to France. And he decided or agreed to pay reparations to France for the successful sort of, two slaveholders. And what's fascinating is if you look in the United States, really the only people who received reparations in the United States were slaveholders too. In certain states, in order to, quote, free their slaves during the Civil War, they were offered by their states reparations, as opposed to the enslaved people themselves. And so I'm sure you can imagine how hard it was for Haiti to rise up and thrive economically in the 19th century, when on the one hand, they were paying reparations, and on the other hand, they were the only free Black republic in the Western Hemisphere. And they were a beacon of freedom for even Americans who of course were galvanized to abolition as a result. Other questions? I think Ellie had raised her or
Yeah,
his
hi,
hand.
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You're set. Yeah, Eli, it's nice to meet you.
Eli,
And
sorry.
virtually. And I was just wondering, this is kind of a different take, but I'm interested in like law and policy, and specifically wondering, I have some interest in the Supreme Court, and I'm wondering if my take right now sort of on where we're looking at in terms of like policies for equity or merely equality, it seems like there's a lot of, we being, I guess, the United States, doing a lot of sort of just putting out fires, right? It's just a lot of these sort of like case by case basis, which, we've seen work, and I kind of quote, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's sort of life history, and starting with the little fires to kind of create more trajectory, especially with women's rights. But I wonder if you have any thoughts of this idea of like effectiveness in putting out fires versus going sort of larger, and understanding, also taking in the context of, people. So just thinking about Washington is these big changes don't come. They just don't happen. They're not going to happen, right? You're not going to have that. I mean, it could in the long term, but whether or not putting out fires is that like effective enough, right? I don't know if that makes sense.
So putting out fires, knowing that the fires are going to continue, is essentially knowing that people are still going to be burned and harmed, and typically it's those people of color, at least as it relates to race, and then some of the very people who are, quote, who only willing to put out fires are then turning around and saying they care about people of color, even though they don't want to sort of eliminate the harm. And so obviously, to me, I'm more focused on eliminating the harm, thinking about the root of the problem itself, investigating why these fires start to begin with. But obviously that's much harder than putting out fires. Albert?
Hi, Dr. Kendi. Thank you so much for taking my question. And mine is a follow-up a little bit to the last one. You mentioned at the beginning, you described an event that when it was occurring was deemed impossible for a lot of people in a lot of people's minds, the rebellion, of course. And as I think about today, the narrative about change happening slowly is something I hear often. And so, or change seeming impossible. With the most recent election, to remove Donald Trump obviously was needed and needed to happen quickly. But however, to counteract that, the support thrown behind Joe Biden to counteract what we were seeing was tremendous. And now as we look at his presidency in the first few days, at least in my mind, we see a lot of complacency kind of returning towards a status quo or towards long-term change or systematic change seeming impossible. I know most notably his possibility to change things is great, and we've seen a lot of those in executive actions. But on the flip side of that, we've also seen his capacity to deport people at almost 1,000 people per day in just his first just over 26 days of presidency, or 28. I don't know exactly how much it's been so far. And so my question is, going along with the last question, what do you say to that narrative of, we should be happy and understand that change happens slow in Washington. We should be happy with the treatment of, I guess, symptoms and not causes. We should be happy with are satisfied, I guess, with the actions that we've seen so far in the first month.
So what I say to that is that the people who are making that case, they are making that case typically arguing that it is that they are not making that case from a particular ideology. In other words, they present themselves as wise, as practical, and then they present those who are calling for more structural change as that's too much, that's too costly, that's too extreme. And I mention that because they have a philosophy too. And their philosophy is gradual, in this case, equality. Just like before the Civil War, their philosophy was gradual emancipation. They told Black folk, y'all gonna have to wait 30 years. Weeks before Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he sent a message to Congress in which it was really a message to the Confederacy, and stated that he offered them, if they laid down their arms, a gradual emancipation plan where they would only have to decide between now, 1862 December, and 1900 to free their Black folks, quote, their Black people, and they would be compensated for it. So we'll give you 37 years to free Black people, and that was considered practical. It was considered sound. It was considered a way to bring Americans together. We need unity. All the while, what do you think Black folks thought about that, right? And obviously, the Confederacy rejected that to their own peril. We now know. But to me, it's similar to those who are saying the same thing to Latinx people. Well, y'all just gonna have to wait, right? It's gonna take time to undo the damage of the Trump administration, or, Black folks were still being choked by police even though they're 9 years old. Oh, y'all are just gonna have to sort of wait. It just takes time to bring about change. I mean, to me, that's their philosophy talking. That's not practicality or wisdom. Final question or comment. Anyone? Yes, Jessica.
Hi, Dr. Kendi. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting. I'm a principal of a middle school, and so I come here to listen and learn. And I heard a lot of questions about, big sweeping changes. Like, it can't be a gradual, it's got to be an all or nothing. And we only have control of our sphere of influence, right? And so I look at what I have control over. And I guess the focus that I have is how can we raise future children to be citizens of this country in a diverse democracy? And what are the steps education needs to take? And I don't think of that as a political being. I see that as individual leaders coming to the table to take care of kids. What would you recommend that as a leader of building, what should you be doing to shape and to say this is not enough? We have to do this.
Well, let me speak broadly, and then I think this also is relevant specifically to a specific school or a specific classroom. I think first, we have an educational model where the kids who have the least in their homes typically have the least in their schools. And then we call that fair. When it should be those who have the least in their homes should have the most in their schools. That's called equity. And we need to create school funding policies that assure that. Secondly, we live in a multiracial, multicultural, and even multi-ethnic nation. And our curriculum and even the learning styles and even the examples that teachers use in the classrooms and even the teachers themselves have to reflect their students and have to reflect their society. And even if it doesn't, even if it's a homogenous white school, to me, it is a crime to teach a group of white students about white American history and culture and not teach them about all these other cultures and racial groups and ethnic groups who they're going to have to interact with. That's a crime. And then we blame them when they can't connect or when they don't understand. Or when they become Kyle Rittenhouse, right? So, I think that that's absolutely sort of critical. And then finally, I'm obviously not a fan of standardized tests, and I'll stop there. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, on this tea time. It's something we're going to be doing regularly, especially this year that I'm not teaching. And Catherine, thank you and the Howard Thurman Center for hosting this event. And again, I just wanted to really emphasize that, we should not derive our hope from what's happening in society. But if ever we're feeling hopeless, if ever we're thinking something is impossible, just read up on the Haitian Revolution, and you'll it will be a well of hope for you as it certainly is for me. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.